On this episode of the Morning Star Podcast.
Zooming out in this bigger picture thing, I think no matter who you are, whether you're doing adoption or you've got infertility struggles, every one of us, our life is not going to play out exactly how we plan.
Yeah.
And so just, we certainly had things where we had to pivot and move and adjust and change, for the entirety of our journey of wanting to have kids. And so to see that there were plenty of times where we saw the Lord at work and we saw him moving from point A to point B to point C, but it wasn't the way that we wanted or planned out. So just to let go of control and allow him to lead us, and then to follow where he's leading and to trust that it's not just where he's going, but it's a good place. It's the best place to be. And so that I think was just, that was something we had to continually be doing. And then to do that together, to know that we both want that, and to know that we both desire for God to be glorified in how we are living our lives out individually and as a family. Just to continue to remind ourselves of that was really important.
Welcome to the Morning Star Podcast, where we engage in meaningful conversations that display God's handiwork and encourage you to live a Jesus-first life. Today's episode tells a story of God's faithfulness even in the most challenging circumstances. So listen in to learn more about your church family.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Morning Star Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Mayhew, and I have with me today Jared and Rayanna Boltman. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Very good.
Good. I am so excited to have you guys on the podcast. You've been good friends to me and to many in the family here at Morning Star, and also just the way that you love the family here and just the enthusiasm you bring it's unlike any other. We're so grateful to have you both as a part of our church family, and very, very blessed. And I'm excited to have you both finally on the podcast. Been hoping for this for a while. So real quick, before we get started, why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourself? Say a little bit about yourself and how long you've been at Morningstar, maybe. Rayanna?
My name's Rayanna, and I'm married to Jared.
Congrats.
And I can never remember how long I've been at Morningstar, so I always have to ask Jared.
You started
not
coming
good at
in
math.
July of 2005.
05.
Okay. 18 years.
18 years.
Yes.
Nice.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Nice.
My name is Jared, and I have been here for 23 and a half years.
23 and a half years.
On staff for 16 years.
So you were here just after Y2K? Just before Y2K?
December 13th of 1999 was my first Sunday here.
Just in time for the new millennium.
Yeah.
Wow. Well timed. Makes counting easy. Nice. So we wanted to have you guys on to talk about infertility and a lot of the related things, which you guys have gone through a lot of related, everything from infertility struggles, miscarriages to other, I don't know the proper words, but things like that. But before we kind of delve into that, I was hoping you guys could kind of set the scene maybe a little bit with maybe where were you guys at, like with each other, with Jesus, right when you got married, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. And what year was that? Just for my curiosity.
We got married.
June 3rd of 2006.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had, as we've gone through premarital counseling, we had talked about having kids, and that was something that we both wanted to do, kind of in the 2 to 3 kids range.
We actually didn't even talk about it till after we were engaged, and it was asked in our counseling session. We're like, we should probably talk about family planning a little bit.
Yeah,
But we had a conversation before. I already knew before we got married that I might have trouble getting pregnant.
Okay.
And so that was something that we knew might happen, but we weren't sure how hard it would be before we got married. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so how, when you guys start to realize that this is actually a struggle for you guys, or when do you actually start to realize, do you guys have a miscarriage or something? Do you have do you start already seeking artificial embryos, or what?
No, we decided to try. Well, first we had talked to genetics counseling because.
Yeah. Pretty early on. When was that? What year was that?
That was the first year we were married. We decided to talk to a genetics counselor because Jared has a nerve disease. And so,
so 2006, 2007, we're talking to a genetics counselor because I have a nerve disease called Charcot-Marie-Tooth. CMT for short, not country music television. CMT, Charcot-Marie tooth, and it's a degenerative nerve disease that affects the legs and arms. And so my hands are very weak, my legs are very weak. I wear metal leg braces all the time to walk. And so that is something that I was certainly concerned about. Was this something I was going to be passing on 100% chance, 80% chance, 50% chance to a potential child? And so it was a big concern, a big roadblock for me.
Pretty early on in our marriage. So besides the fact that we knew it might be hard to get pregnant, we knew we had to go through that decision. Do we want to risk? Because ultimately the geneticist said it was about a 50-50 chance with each child. And so we had to pray through what that meant for our family. So
a lot of prayer, a lot of time to think about it. And we kind of decided that, we were okay with this. This would be something that we'd be willing to do if God, if we were able to get pregnant, then that was going to be something that it took me longer to settle, I think, than you.
Yeah. We had time though, because we weren't ready to have kids right away, even though it was concerned, because we were considered old when we got married for the first time. I think, how old was I? 28, 29?
Wait, first time? What do you mean first time?
Oh, sorry. Again.
we were 28 when we got married.
Anyway, we haven't been married before.
But the potential to pass on this genetic nerve disease is, some people have it not nearly as bad as I do. Some have it way worse. So it wasn't that it was just, we wanted to really be prepared for, if it was passed on, how could we best take care of a child who had that? And so, we weren't going to avoid having a child because of that, but we wanted to be very intentional and caring and loving and being prepared for what that was going to look like. So.
And we wanted to wait to have kids, at least try it until Jared was done with school, because he started seminary when we were dating. And so he still had a few years of school left. So we wanted to be a little bit more financially stable and ready to have a child, because we just didn't know where we were going to end up once he finished school. So we decided to wait. We didn't start trying to get pregnant until about 4 years after we got married. We finally started
as far trying. As really, really okay, we are now at a place where we really are
right around the time where our house was being built, and we knew we were going to be here for the long haul.
But if, at the beginning of our marriage, it's okay, if we get pregnant, then that's the Lord's plan. But it wasn't intentional, this is the direction that we're feeling called to go.
Yeah. So. That makes sense. Were you guys was there any, because Rayanna, you said you knew you might struggle to get pregnant, and then Jared, you were worried about passing on your nerve disease. Did you guys have any resentment towards God for that or anything?
Not at that point.
Okay.
Because we just didn't know. I have a disease called polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I didn't know that's what it was at the time until we started trying to get pregnant. I had a doctor tell me, when I was in my 20s, that I might have trouble getting pregnant, but didn't explain why. I didn't know how to advocate for myself back then. And so it wasn't really a resentment towards the Lord or anything, because it just hadn't really settled in until we started trying. So there was definitely some hardness when we started trying, and it started to be a struggle. We went through some pretty tough stuff in our marriage for a while, and some frustrations when there was just nothing. But so there's more we could talk about that. But until we actually started trying and all of our friends started having kids and we didn't.
Yeah.
It's fun to be the cool aunt, but it's also hard.
Yeah, for sure.
And cool uncle too. We were a lot of fun, but it was hard. So
resentment towards the Lord. I actually had that before coming to the Lord. Grew up going to church, grew up where God was important, but didn't actually make my faith my own until I was in college. And so for me, going to church and then kind of walking away from the rhythms and routines of church and just being around Christians was kind of my, I don't really believe this. I don't want to do this. But some friends that really cared about me shared the good news with me, encouraged me, walked with me. And so that was just kind of a big wrestling in my heart at that time to process what that was going to be like. And So that questioning and frustration was, I thought I believed that God existed, but I wasn't sure what that was going to look like. And I didn't, maybe this God isn't loving. That was kind of in my high school and early college days.
But at this point in time, you'd already worked through that to a degree.
I had definitely worked through it at this point. It's just like, okay, God, I'm glad I worked through this earlier. Take those lessons that I learned and let's just see what your plan is and what your purposes are. And yes, it would be nice for us to have biological kids as soon as we were ready for that. But if your plan is other, then let's see what that is, because we know it's a perfect plan. So,
yeah. And Rayanna, you said you had some resentment, but had you ever had a period of resentment before, kind of like him, or was this your first time really
It was my first time really struggling through my faith. I had been a believer since I was a kid. I never really, I'd had other friends walk away from their faith, but I think I was pretty solid with my trust in the Lord early on in my life. And that never wavered through college or even through a long time of being single. I trusted the Lord with whatever kind of got thrown in my path. So, there were other struggles, but that part of my faith never wavered until we got to that point of not being able to have children and going through that part. So that's the first time I had really struggled that much with feeling for a while like the Lord was silent. That was really hard.
And would this resentment kind of linger on for a while, or?
Yeah, we tried for 8 years-ish.
Okay.
So something when you're trying to have children and you can't, we might go into some details that might get uncomfortable, but every month, basically when my period would start, it was really hard. Jared was awesome in how he would support me, but there is just a loneliness you feel when you're trying month after month. I just remember probably wasn't the healthiest thing, but I would just go in what we hoped would be the nursery. We had a rocking chair there, and I would cry. I might cry now just thinking about that. But and it's hard too, because when you first get married, one of the first questions people ask is so when are you going to have kids? And when you're in ministry, being more upfront, you get asked that a lot.
I bet,
And people are excited for you as you're starting your marriage and stuff. And so, but to be constantly asked that question by people, and then month after month to fail, especially when you want it so much, it gets hard and it takes a toll on your body and your mental health. For me personally, it was really tough because we were already older when we got married and already knowing it might be hard. So that month after month of nothing happening and then having to go through the pain of not being pregnant and also have cramps at the same time and be hormonal anyway, it's just really hard. So it was very difficult because it was years of that and it was hard on our marriage too. Jared was super supportive, but it's hard when the person you're closest to can't understand or other people don't understand what you're feeling in those moments of failure, of what you think you should be able to do, especially when you want to be a mom. So,
How did this affect your guys' marriage?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, I wanted to just, and I did. There were times I would just hold you and hug you and try to be there for you, but I couldn't get into your brain and experience what you were experiencing, though I wanted to try and understand what you were experiencing. And it's hard because I don't think anybody really did this intentionally, but there's often these vibes of the perfect Christian family is a mom and dad and two biological children. And that's great if that's how the Lord does that for your particular family, but that's not the biblical definition of family. Family is we are adopted into the family of God. And that looks so different in so many different instances. And so God may open up an instance where an adoption, whether it's a domestic traditional adoption or an embryo adoption or other ways, a family may just be a husband and wife. A family may be, one children and that second one never comes. A family may be 8 or 9 or 10. kids.
Yeah.
It may just be, families just look so different, and to think like this really narrow definition is the only way to do it. And so sometimes the vibe is given off of, well, you're not really following the Lord fully if you don't have kids. And I just think that can be so harmful and hurtful and unnecessary.
It's not that everybody always said that either. Like,
No, but
Satan has a way of finding ways to shame you, no matter how well you're following the Lord. And so I think for us, those comments, Satan, in a sense, used that to kind of make us feel like failures a lot of times early on in our marriage. So
we would just try to talk through things and listen to each other. And I just remember some of our dates that we would go on and just sit in restaurants and just hear how each other was doing.
Yeah.
And
we also stayed very busy and active.
Yeah.
So you do things to fill the time so that you're not so focused on it, because it does distract you from the joys that the Lord does have planned for you. Yeah. So we traveled and we talked a lot. It wasn't easy sometimes, especially when the Lord started to change our heart back towards adoption. There was definitely some challenges for a while that we had to be patient for. So
what, because you kind of talked about some of the things people were saying, like if someone listening knows someone who's also struggling to trying to have kids, like what would you say are some like good do's and don'ts?
I would say personally, take the time to research what's helpful to say. Pinterest is great for that. I'm addicted to Pinterest, but just being there for them. Some people that are very close to me were very thoughtful in how they approached the "how are you doing" rather than "any news yet." Is a really hard phrase to take. If they know that you're trying, just like, where is your heart right now? Are you okay to talk about it right now? Or where are you guys at right now? Ask us about other things besides just the pregnancy. If you're not pregnant. So that was always really helpful for me. Like when people gave me the space to say, I don't want to talk about it right now, or I want to talk about it right now. Always giving advice like, well, I had a friend who did this and this. And it's like, well, we've already researched that. Or have you tried this supplement, or have you tried this tape to listen to, or, those kind of things. All of those are helpful things, but sometimes you can get kind of, especially from people who've had kids already, they tend to say what they've worked or seen in other people work, and not asking how your story is going can be really hard because they don't take into account that we might already be trying everything. So,
and I want to reiterate, I don't think it's intentionally. Because people well-intentioned want to try to help.
We had so much support and so much prayer from people, and it was great, but it was very hard sometimes because you do get that fatigue of people always asking. So,
and probably the one that we heard the most is, well, if you adopt a kid,
one was hard.
You're probably going to get pregnant.
That one was really hard when we made the decision.
Because they've seen a personal story of somebody adopted and then they got pregnant, and they assume that's not the norm to everybody. That's not. That's like, we knew medically that was not an option, and so we weren't going to correct them in that moment. But it's like, oh, thank you. Like, we know you're trying to help and be supportive.
But it takes away from the joy and the process of the adoption and where we're at and feeling supported in that. And so that was really hard. We actually had someone try to prophesy over us about getting pregnant once. It wasn't somebody that we knew well, but she was well-intentioned and wanted to show how she cared, but it was not helpful in that we were already in the adoption process. And here she was saying, this isn't going to happen. You're going to get pregnant. It's like, no, that was really hard. So
I think one of the best things that people can do when somebody is going through this, one of the best things you can do is to just see those people, that person, as valued and precious and loved and created by God, and not see their value in whether they can or can't have biological children, but to see their value as somebody who's created by God. So whether they're single, whether they're married, whether they have kids or don't have kids, they are precious in God's sight, and they are whole by being who God's created them to be, not by doing a thing accomplishing a task of having a kid.
That's a lot of how God sees us, right?
Yep, absolutely.
It's not like he requires our works to save us. He's saving us just by his grace through our faith. Yeah. I think that's good advice for the situation, for probably everyone. Yeah. Just like in every situation, just see each other as beloved children of God and not just, what are you doing for me or for the church or whatever. You guys tried for 8 years. Did I hear that right?
By the time Maya came home to us, it had been 8 years.
Yeah. So you started, at some point you started to try adoption, domestic adoption.
Yes.
Is that the correct phrasing? Mm-hmm.
I got to a point where I told Jared I couldn't do the waiting anymore. It was too much. We had gotten to the point where the doctor said it was either stop trying, do IVF. That was when we found out that we couldn't naturally get pregnant because my eggs just weren't there. They were there, but not there. They weren't healthy. We might have been able to force it through IVF, but I just had read enough to say I did not want to go through that. And at that point, pregnancy was just hard to swallow, as far as I didn't want to go through the pain of that anymore trying. And I realized in my heart with wanting to be a mom that it was more about being a mom than being pregnant. They're only babies for a little while. Yeah. You have a whole life with them. And if all I wanted was the pregnancy, then that wasn't to me being a good mom, because that was more about me than raising my children. And so I felt selfish for that. And so I knew I was ready to start the adoption process and researching what that was about and how I was going to love a child no matter what their background was. And so unfortunately, I got to that point a lot faster than Jared did in that moment. I'm trying to remember when I got to that moment exactly. I don't, but I remember I started bringing it up saying, I don't want to do this anymore. And so that was a little bit of a hard moment when we weren't on the same page for a while.
Yeah. I think you were there a full year before me. It was probably mid-ish, 2011-ish.
Yeah. It was.
So you were there a whole year before. And my thing was very selfish and prideful. I wanted to be as concerned as I was about passing on the nerve disease to our child. It's like, well, okay, but that, carrying on that genetic line was as a man, as a guy, that was important for me to do that. And so I had to wrestle with that for a full year.
Our marriage was pretty lonely for a while in that year. We would talk about it a lot with other people, but
we talked about it a lot together, but we didn't talk about it with a lot of other people.
It wasn't more talking. It was more arguing late at night for a while. Definitely tested our marriage, but I'm thankful that we are who we are and we got through it. Because sometimes when people have to deal with infertility, it can ruin marriages. So even though we knew it was a hard spot, we knew we wouldn't be there forever. So
And you said you didn't talk a lot with other people about it. Is that something that was that intentional? Was that something you wish you had done differently, or?
We talked about our infertility, but not necessarily where we were struggling in our marriage.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Probably should have done counseling at that point.
Yeah, I think we probably, it felt like we were just kind of exhausted. And drained in a way. We felt like we couldn't really talk to other people because we didn't really have anything to
we didn't want to admit how much we were struggling with that. So, and it's hard, when you're in a position of leadership and you're supposed to present a strong marriage, biblically they talk about that. And it's like, oh no, we're struggling. Who do we actually talk to? And it was hard to admit that we were struggling, but we got through it. We prayed a lot. A lot.
Good. Yeah. Good. So then you finally, Jared, come around.
I finally came around.
Yeah. What changed for you?
As we're talking about this, I'm just trying to remember specifically. I do remember us sitting in a restaurant, looking over information, and I just like a dumb idiot that I am, I just wow, now I get it. And I can't for the life of me.
You still weren't on board quite yet, though. There was still things you had to work through.
Mid 2012.
That big,
at that
long,
point.
we had this like 100-point questionnaire that I had found
Holy cow.
on the internet on like going through like understanding adoption. Like I had done all this research and read books before he had. And so, I wanted him to go through these points because we didn't know where to start with adoption. Like, did we want to do foreign adoption? Did we want to do domestic adoption? What did that mean? And so I wanted him to understand because I knew that with domestic adoption, it's a lot more open than it used to be. And I wanted him to feel comfortable with what I already knew. So I made him go out to dinner with me and go through this 100-point questionnaire. And I remember him just being like wide-eyed at some of the questions. And
was synonymous with co-parenting. So I thought, like, how weird would that be? Like, we're making a decision for the child, and then the biological parents are making another decision. And what if those decisions clash? And how do we raise them? We want to make sure they're following Jesus and growing in the Lord. And what if they don't? And so I just had all these total misconceptions and misunderstandings about what open adoption actually is.
What?
And in your mind, you thought I would kind of give up a little bit too, because I remember not long after that, we went to Israel on a trip, and basically it was like, okay, if we're not pregnant by then, I'll start to look at like we'll talk to a lawyer, we'll talk to an adoption agency.
Yeah, at that point,
and
we
you
decided.
still thought like, I remember you had said you had still thought this wasn't going to happen, but we did pray during our trip with whatever would happen. And so as soon as we got back, I think we were still a little bit jet lagged. We went to an adoption lawyer, and then we went to, and you still were thinking, we're not going to do this. Or I'm not going to do an open adoption, like not being really sensitive about that. And then we went to an adoption agency. We'd already met with one adoption agency, but your real aha moment, and I had not even realized you were having an aha moment. We were at an informational meeting, like a video that explained open adoption at our adoption agency. And I was ready to walk out of the room, and I turn around and he's just like sobbing with the director. And it was at that point I knew like this was really what the Lord was calling us to. And it was such a moment of peace because I knew that he was there where I was a year before that. And it was such a healing moment for both of us because it kind of sealed like where we were at and that we were on the same path where the Lord was leading us. And so I was so thankful that I had waited for him patiently because it made it more special when he was ready. So
in that restaurant in May of 2012, when we were talking about, okay, if when we get back from Israel in November of 2012, if we're not pregnant by then we'll really pursue adoption and see what that looks like. It was kind of I was kind of capitulating, like, all right, we'll give it a few more months and then we'll just kind of see what it's like. But my heart wasn't 100% it. I had moved to the point where I was ready to follow what the Lord was doing in your heart with that, and hoping that I would get there. And then it was seeing what the heart and the vision of open adoption is in that information meeting, where it was just like, wow, this is so clear. And it was beautiful.
For my clarification, open adoption?
Yeah.
What's like 30-second?
Yeah. So adoption so my dad is actually also adopted. Okay. And so growing up, he found out that he was adopted when he was 18.
Oh, okay.
His whole life was
Mm-hmm.
considered kind of, he couldn't trust, he couldn't build relationships with people. Mm-hmm. And it was really hard because everything he knew was not true. Mm-hmm. Open adoption is helping the child from the youngest and earliest age know that they are adopted in a way that they can understand and in a way that they can process. Mm-hmm. And then as they get older, helping them understand a little bit more about that. So age appropriate sharing of information and helping them see that they're loved and cared for and that their birth mother made the best decision for them and that their adoptive parents love and care for them, but that they're communicating, that they're open to getting letters or information or calls or even visits and just getting to know them and to see who they are.
There's different levels of open adoption too. And it's not like, it can be very fluid because there are adoption instances where it is somewhat more of a co-parent, or there is a close relationship. And other open adoptions, it's just sharing medical advice with like their history and stuff. Yeah. And so all in all, they've found, and American culture with adoption, it never used to be that way really historically. It was just a shorter period of time. We read through a history of adoption in America. And it, for some reason, it got popular to not tell kids they were adopted or not share birth family. And so they found like psychologically how not healthy that was for kids. And so, which that makes it hard because not every adoption is open either. Like if you think about kids who've been adopted foreign wise, they might not have that option either. And sometimes that doesn't even happen now, but to try to do it in a way that the child understands as they get older, and how important that is. And sometimes it's not an option. So yeah, there's different, like there's a whole huge definition of open adoption, and it's unique to each family.
Yeah, no, that's,
I guess maybe in a way, a sentence we could describe it as seeing the value and health of everybody involved rather than just what's simple for the adoptive parents, I guess.
And it doesn't make it,
if we don't tell them, then everything, just pretend it didn't happen. Like that's obviously not healthy.
And it's not easy. Even with an open adoption, and we're learning that as our daughter gets older, it's not necessarily easy. There's still emotions that she has to work through, no matter how well we show her or her birth mom, how much she sees her, all that. There's still things that she has to process no matter what. It's not just, oh, you were adopted, so now we're a happy family and it's never going to be hard. That's not how it works. It's complicated. There's a grief process. No matter how early on you adopt a child, or no matter how much love you give them, there's still a unique process they have to go through to understand how their family was formed and how they're loved, and that they don't get that sense of abandonment. They still have to process through that.
Yeah, so. We adopted our oldest daughter at 45 minutes old. She wanted us to be in the delivery room. We couldn't get there.
We didn't quite make it. I was too far at work, and
I was speeding down I-5 to get there to Eugene as fast as we could. We missed it, but
it ended up being the right thing.
Yeah, it was the right thing. But we had her from that first day, and but there's still that processing that grief and loss even years later, because for her first 9 months of development, she was hearing her biological mother's voice. And so she was used to that. There's the rhythm of her heartbeat. And so all of those things are something that you are then separated from. And so you process that years later. And so it is so much more healthy if it's possible and if it's safe to have an open adoption. And we've been really incredibly thankful for what we've had.
That's good. So like at this point, you're considering open adoption. You've been trying for 8 years. Had you guys had anything like happen along that 8-year timeline? I don't just want to skip over it, or.
Yeah, we had a couple of near matches that were.
At least one. We got to the point where.
Near matches, sorry.
Like, hey, a friend knows somebody that's going to adopt, and they want you to.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Oh, wait, never mind.
We got to the point. And she changed her mind, which was fine. She ended up getting a support system, because a lot of these moms who are pursuing adoption, you have to understand that a lot of times they're going through trauma. They're going through high levels of stress without a lot of support. So one of the hard things about going through domestic adoption is sometimes the birth mom will change their mind, even the day of the baby being born, because one of the reasons we chose the adoption agency that we did was because they give support emotionally and monetarily. Like they make sure that birth mom is taken care of in many aspects. And so sometimes when things calm down and they are able to plan, sometimes better support comes in, and then they're able to choose to parent, which we love that. And that's part of the reason we chose the adoption agency that we did, was because they were giving that support to that birth mom. So they didn't feel like they were being forced to make a choice that they really didn't want to do because they thought they had no options. But sorry, I digressed a little bit, but I forgot what the question was. Oh, yes, we did have a match, but it was still a hard process, especially that baby was due in December. So we had to go through Christmas knowing that a baby was going to be born that was almost ours in a sense. So that, and also one of our first miscarriages was right around Christmas. So it was Christmas was hard for a while. But
And that was
yeah.
2011 that we had that miscarriage.
Yeah.
You were already set on doing adoption, and I was not quite there yet. So that
Yeah.
made things even harder.
Yeah.
What could you compare that miscarriage?
Um,
Especially like when you're thinking about adopting right now, like, and then all of a sudden that
yeah, I think it was not long after that. I was like, I'm done. I can't do this
Okay.
anymore.
With that particular,
Yeah,
with
there was
us
definitely
trying to do.
a grief process, and I got a little bit more angry. Like, I'm done. I can't do this. But yeah,
But even though we weren't talking with a lot of people outside of us, we had and still have core people who were there for us,
Yeah, and
cared
supported
about
us
us,
and-
listened to us. And so we would covet their prayers and talk with them. It was just
Yeah.
a smaller group
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
people that we,
like a lot of people knew we were dealing with infertility, but the hard emotions, that we just had a core group of people that we really talked to. So
So community,
yeah,
basically.
absolutely. Yeah.
very much so.
Yeah, we had to have that.
Yeah.
praying for each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you guys you adopt the domestic adoption for your first.
Mhm.
And then like how does that like affect your guys's like family? Like obviously
That's a big question.
Big question. Yeah. But like how does it affect you guys? How does it affect your relationship with Jesus? Like is it like all these expectations, did they just get like unmet, and was it like, or like was it better? Like what? Fill me in. Yeah.
I think one thing I want to say with infertility and adoption, adopting does not heal infertility. The Lord heals us. And I never expected our daughter to be that healing process for us. I didn't want her to be our healing process. So you can't put that on a child.
Yeah.
The Lord ultimately healed. He took away my desire to be pregnant at that time. And he put me full on into, I get to love this child and her uniqueness and her background and everything that she is. And I get to be her mom. I get to share her with her first mom. We still call her birth mom, her first mom.
Okay.
That was special to us. Not everybody would say that, but, and we also let her birth mom know that too. And that was important to us. But yeah, I wanted her to know that, but I already forgot the question. I got off track. Sorry.
That's okay. Like, how did that, I guess kind of continuing, how did that affect like your relationship with Jesus? You said, talk about the Lord healing.
Yeah. Like for me, I don't know how bitter Jared got, but I did go through before we started the adoption thoughts and working through, I got pretty bitter with the Lord, especially when I had some people in our family that had a baby that they shouldn't have necessarily had a baby in a sense. There's some details there with our family, but just being angry, like, why do people who don't have the capacity or emotional capacity to raise a child, why do they get to have babies and I don't?
Yeah.
There was that definite frustration with me. And I got angry for a while. The Lord had to really work on my heart with that because that's forgetting about redemption and it's forgetting about, it's not just about being a good person. Like I had to go through that with the Lord and wrestle with him on that. And in a sense, let go of some selfish desires that I had and frustration and bitterness. And I think when we started the adoption process and when our daughter came, it was so obvious that it was the Lord directing our path. When we went through, that might be where our verse comes up, where we talk about that a little bit. But just when her birth mom chose us and we got the call, it was just so obvious from the Lord that this was what he planned for. That there's some healing that goes on. Obviously, our daughter didn't heal that, but the Lord did, because he showed us so clearly that this was what I have for you. And this is how I redeem your story and her story. And I'm at work in this. And so it was so very special that we got to have those moments with our adoption with Maya. And yeah,
I think it, even quite a ways before the actual placement with the adoption, I think when we were both settled on adoption and that was the path that the Lord had for us, there was a process of, okay, let's make sure we're not going into this expecting that a child or two children or whatever, that's going to take away that sadness. Like Pastor Scott talked about last week, we put these tremendous burdens on our loved ones that they're not able to carry. And we all tend to do that, especially to the people we love the most. So we were very intentional to not go into that expecting that a child was going to heal us. That it needed to be the Lord to do that work in our hearts and in our minds and through lots of prayer. And so I think we're solid in that leading up even a year or two before. And so when Maya was born, we were able to just love her for who she is, who God created her to be. And so it was just a pretty special, beautiful time.
That's good. That's good. So at this time, you guys have adopted Maya, your firstborn, if it wasn't clear, your oldest daughter.
Yeah.
And then where do you guys go next? Because there's more to the story, I know, but I'm just trying to lead along a little bit.
We were just really settled and appreciative and thankful for a couple of years of getting to know her and see who she is and understand her, and just be very intentional about loving her and sharing with her what adoption is. And just, we wanted to focus our time on her, but also there was this in the background, like, do we want another adoption? What does that look like? And so there's a couple of years of,
we went through some hard. What do I say? Some physical complications after an accident when she was about 2. Our daughter has a strong personality too.
Yeah. Do you want to share with those physical? I mean, that was a hard.
Well, I broke both my arms in an accident.
At the same time.
Very suddenly. Wow. And so trying to take care of a 2-year-old with 2 broken elbows was difficult. She had to get shuffled around for a while because Jared was literally brushing my teeth and helped me go to the bathroom until that was about 3 weeks before they said, okay, now you can use your left arm, but you can't use your right arm.
She turned 2 years old.
Yeah. And so it wasn't just my elbows. I sprained, I messed up my whole body.
Jesus.
Yeah. So, and then right around that time, Maya started to struggle with some things. And so in my heart, I didn't know if I could handle another child. And so I went through a time of, how do I handle one child when I'm struggling, when she's struggling? We're going through some hard things. Things are kind of up in the air, and I don't know if I can be there for another one, you know? And so I wasn't ready. And so it was kind of funny because the tables kind of turned in that Jared and Maya wanted our family to grow, and I couldn't emotionally get there. So he had to wait for me for a while before we could get to that point. And it actually took our daughter nightly asking for a sibling, praying over and over and over again, especially during COVID when we were just so isolated. That was just her thing. And so I think it was the Lord's way of working on my heart. Like, where are you at? And I have this new thing that I want you to do, in a sense, that he started to work on my heart. And we got to that point of being able to take the next step for what we were going to do, which was very different than our first adoption. So
I was born February 16. Your arms accident happened in February 18.
Yeah.
It was around mid-2019, that I just felt like I was ready for us to try again, and not even sure, what does this look like? Are we looking at traditional adoption? What are you? And we had some conversations like, if you do this again, it would probably be.
We were nervous about the weight and my age, about being a mom. That was a little bit selfish of me. But then I was having some conversations with my doctor, and she said something, and she's like, because I was going through health checks and stuff. She's like, there's nothing wrong with your uterus. You just can't make babies. But a baby might grow. And that kind of placed in my heart, like, oh, what about embryo adoption? Because it was something I had heard about a long time ago, but kind of written it off because they had said I was a higher risk of miscarriage at some point. But then my doctor was like, no, you probably would be okay. And so at that point, we had tried for a few months to see if a certain medication would work with us trying to get pregnant, to see if it could force the eggs to grow, but it didn't work. And I still didn't want to do IVF. But then the Lord kind of turned my heart towards embryo adoption. So
what's that?
Like end of April 2020.
Okay.
We're a month and a half into COVID.
Yeah.
We are.
nothing's sure.
Everything is chaos. Everything is crazy. And at that point, I remember you messaged me. You sent me a text message because I was here at the church.
Yeah.
We were doing a first responders cleaning thing where people would come and they'd get their vehicles cleaned, and we would give them a thank you goodie bag with all sorts of practical things that they needed.
I remember that.
And I remember towards the end of that event, you sent me a message and said, I think I'm ready. And I remember we had been praying about that and talking about that. And I remember exactly where I was on this property here thinking, okay.
I don't even remember that part of it.
So for a whole year prior to that.
I had been doing research and that, so I researched it and then I told him I was ready. So he had a lot of catching up to do again.
Yeah. So I'm reading my phone. I'm thinking, praise the Lord. And at the same time, holy heck, we're in the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Now the rubber meets the road. Okay, let's do this. And so at that point, it was a process of really learning what embryo adoption is. And you probably are better at describing what it is. So if you want to share.
I don't know where to start.
From the beginning.
So embryo adoption it's a way for families. So one of the challenges with IVF that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about is when they go through the treatments to try to get pregnant, it can hyperstimulate ovaries and you can end up with a lot of embryos. So an embryo is a baby that's already growing. They freeze. They have a freezing process that saves the baby at day 5 or 6. Now it used to be earlier than that, but that's changed. But so it's actually a baby that's been frozen in time.
Okay.
Some people don't understand that. And so it's a part of IVF. So some of these families will have their family, they won't be able to grow their family anymore, but they still have these embryos. They don't want to just donate them to fertility clinics. They want those babies to be known and they're not sure what to do. And so Snowflake's program through Nightlight Christian Adoptions. It's basically to help those families process through letting go of those embryos and finding a family for them in the hopes of some open adoption, which again, open adoption is very fluid as far as how much contact, but that way the child has a chance to know where they come from rather than with through the fertility clinics where they don't necessarily have the option to know where they come from. It's another way of looking at that through the eyes of adoption. So it's interesting. It's complex because embryo adoption is not necessarily, I don't know how to explain this exactly, but federally, and it's still considered property transfer, which is really hard. It's considered property through our culture. But Nightlight approaches it through the heart of adoption. So even though the paperwork is different than a traditional adoption domestically, they still approach it through the eyes of adoption. So we go through a home study process. We go through a matching process where the biological family gets to choose us and we get to choose them. And there's a bond that's formed there, a lot like domestic adoption is. And so our second daughter is actually, and sometimes these embryos have been frozen for a long time. So we had gone through the process a couple times, and when we were successful, our second child was frozen for almost 12 years before we transferred her. So,
so this is an embryo that's formed by the people that trying to have babies themselves. So we adopted that embryo, been frozen for 12 years, and so we adopted three embryos.
Yes.
Right.
This is our second adoption because we actually had tried, we were matched with another family. And unfortunately, one embryo didn't survive thaw, and then we were able to transfer 2, and they were very healthy, which doesn't always guarantee, but at some point they stopped growing. So we did lose those babies. So that was very hard. We went through that whole process and we lost those 2. well, basically we lost 3. We still count that third one. They're a part of our family. And had to wait for my body to heal. Then I got COVID right after. Yep. And then Jared and Maya, it was pretty stressful because we got to the point where we could finally try again. And then Jared and Maya both got COVID the week before we were supposed to go for the transfer. Yeah. And I had an interesting thing happen where the doctors had never seen it before, but I actually didn't make it through the treatment because you have to start shots way before. It's pretty uncomfortable. And I lost my lining. Sorry if that's too much information. They think it was somewhat from the stress from them having COVID. And then also, I think they weren't sure if it was a reaction from me getting my booster shot, which sometimes happens with the women's biological symptoms. When you get stressed, it changes your cycle. And so anyway, we had to start the whole process over again. So, yeah, they have to time it just right. So
September 21, we transferred to embryos. We found out later that month that didn't work. Mm-hmm. November 21, you had COVID.
October, November.
February 22, we were supposed to go back. We had been matched again with a different family because the first family only had those 3 embryos. So then we were supposed to go in February, and then Maya and I both got COVID. So then we moved that to April 22.
Okay. Yeah.
And then in April of 22,
we got pregnant. So we found out, and
with those embryos.
We were super excited at first because my HCG counts were super high at first. And so they thought maybe we had transferred 2. The second one, they were a little bit worried about. They said there was enough cell growth that it was a chance. So they still transferred that baby, but they said it was about a 20% chance that he or she might not survive. And so when we went in, actually, no, it started developing to where they thought it was just one, but we weren't for sure until we went in for our first ultrasound. Okay. We actually ended up having an early ultrasound because on my birthday, I woke up at 5:00 in the morning. Something was wrong. Mm. And I went to the bathroom and immediately started bleeding. Yeah. And so I thought I had a miscarriage. Mm-hmm. And so I had to wake up Jared and I said, I think I'm having a miscarriage. I think we lost them. So that was really tough on my birthday. So again,
a few months earlier,
I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? I feel like a failure. Like, what are we going to do? Like, Lord, why are you letting this happen? When we went all through this, I thought this was our plan, and so it was really hard. And we called the fertility clinic. They said, don't give up yet. They said, are you continuing to bleed? And well, I said, no, it's not as heavy now. Because it was a lot of blood really fast. And so they said, we'll get you in. I hadn't even seen my OBGYN yet because they don't see you until after 8 weeks. And it was at 6 weeks to the day. And they're like, we'll get you in for an ultrasound. Just take it easy. And so we called and they're like, we're going to get you in right away. And so we went in for an ultrasound and we found out that it was just, what did they call it? Basically, I had a very large blood clot. It's where the tissue gets separated in the uterus. Sorry, my brain just stopped as for what it's called. But it happens a lot in women who are older with pregnancy. Subchorionic hemorrhage or something like that is what it was called. It was very large. And so, but it was not where the baby was. Where it gets really dangerous is when it's between the uterus and the placenta. Mine was off to the side away from the baby. And so it was kind of a weird day because first we woke up thinking we'd lost both. Yeah. We found out that there was a heartbeat, but there was just one. So we found out we hadn't had a full miscarriage, but we found out one hadn't survived. And so it was a really weird day. Yeah. And so trying to process that on my birthday, we had joy, but we had sorrow at the same time. So, but we had a baby. Yeah. So, and she survived. So it was a little bit rough, the first part of our pregnancy, because there was a couple times where the bleeding started, but once that healed up, it was fine. Yeah. So
6 weeks was the furthest we had ever been able to go.
We had ever been able to go. Yeah. Yeah. So the fact that she had a normal heartbeat, you could see it, which at 6 weeks, that's really early. It was a little bit slow, but they said that would grow as she grew. And then I was really nervous to go for my actual first ultrasound because I had to go by myself. But she was there. I feel like I held my breath through that whole ultrasound because Jared couldn't be there. And I was like, what if there's not a heartbeat now? But she was strong and she was doing good. So yeah.
Awesome. That's awesome. And that's your second. Okay. Congratulations. That was pretty recently that you guys had her.
Yes. So she's 10 months old now.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Middle name of Joy.
Yes.
Good.
Her name means joy and light of God. And she definitely is just, both of our children live up to their names. Not that they have to, but it's just fun to see how they're growing into what their names mean.
That's good. That's good. So like taking the wider view on all this, how has this journey throughout the whole thing affected your guys' relationship with God?
I think my takeaway is that the Lord is always near. He may not always feel like that, but he walks us through. And looking back, I can't not see how he was working and how he brought us through some hard things. He honored our hard work and trust. Not everybody that chooses this path has success with it.
Yeah.
With, the fact that our marriage stayed healthy through the infertility, through the adoption, that we adopted successfully the first time, that we get to have a good relationship with our daughter's birth mom, and what that looks like. And then the relationship that's growing with our second daughter's biological family, like the fact that we still have a good, healthy marriage through all that, and we still love the Lord through all that. It's just amazing to me that he's been so ever present. And then it's important to look back because we see how he's worked through all of that. So
I think to zooming out in this bigger picture thing, I think no matter who you are, whether you're doing adoption or you've got infertility struggles, every one of us, our life is not going to play out exactly how we plan. And so just, we certainly had things where we had to pivot and move and adjust and change, for the entirety of our journey of wanting to have kids. And so to see that there were plenty of times where we saw the Lord at work and we saw him moving from point A to point B to point C, but it wasn't the way that we wanted or planned out. So just to let go of control and allow him to lead us, and then to follow where he's leading and to trust that it's not just where he's going, but it's a good place. It's the best place to be. And so that I think was just, that was something we had to continually be doing. And then to do that together, to know that we both want that, and to know that we both desire for God to be glorified in how we are living our lives out individually and as a family. Just to continue to remind ourselves of that was really important.
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
On our piano, I have a piece of artwork that I made, and I can never remember the reference. It's in Genesis. But you are the God who sees me. Hagar and her story. And like, even after she went back and her son grew and, all of that didn't make life any easier after. I'm sure it was hard for her to go back to Sarah and Abraham and stuff. But just that phrase, you are the God who sees me. Like, no matter what I'm going through, even if it's a hard day at work or a hard day with kids, a hard day with Jared, anything. He's the God who sees me no matter what I'm struggling through. And he sees the good and the bad, and he still loves me through it. And that's one of the biggest things through our whole story is we have a God who knows us and walks through life with us and has gone through death itself for us. And he saw us in our pain, and we're so small compared to what he's been through, but he still loves us the same. And it's just, that's one of the things that I'll always cherish in our life and our story, is that I have a God who sees me and makes himself known through our circumstances when I trust him. And
that he loves us enough to adopt us into his family. We see that in many places throughout Scripture, that we are adopted into his family, and he has a perfect plan and care and love for us. So He sees us. He's created us. He knows us. He loves us enough to invite him in. He loves us enough to invite us into him. And so when we invite children into our lives, it's just a way to show that love from the Lord. So it's pretty phenomenal that he does that.
I think I found the passage, could be the wrong one. But Genesis 16,
That sounds
13.
about right. Yeah.
So she, being Hagar, named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are El Roy," which means God sees me. For she said, "In this place have I actually seen the one who sees me."
Yeah.
So that's beautiful. Yeah. I know we're running out of time here. I want to be cognizant of that. But I do want to give you guys an opportunity to kind of share any like advice, anything you would say to anyone who is struggling with infertility, which is a problem that happens to a lot of us, and we don't really talk about it a lot as a culture, and sometimes even as a church. So I just want to give the stage to you guys. Like, what would you say to someone who's working through any sort of infertility, whether that's a miscarriage, inability to get pregnant?
That's hard. That's a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question. Mm-hmm.
I think some of the things that were helpful to me when we were going through it is to be mindful what might be painful. Another thing that was super helpful to me was when I had friends who either were pregnant themselves, or like I remember a friend who came and told me that her daughter was pregnant, but she knew I had been struggling with infertility. And so she wanted to tell me before they made announcements, because she knew how much that would hurt my heart. So just to see people who were that thoughtful, knowing that they could still celebrate, but they understood where my heart was. Yeah. They understood I wanted to celebrate their pregnancies, but going to baby showers was hard for a while. And getting baby fixes from friends was great, but sometimes it was really hard to hold a baby, know? And so for people going through that, like just being mindful of your friends who are struggling with that, or maybe struggling, is just to ask, like, what's helpful for you? What's hard for you? Is there anything that I'm doing that's hurtful for you? And you can't do that with everybody. I understand that, but like just being mindful of that it is hard, and giving them space, to be sad or mad or angry, and that it's okay. And that, someone who's going through infertility, they're going to make that effort to be around, but sometimes it's just really hard. And so to show up. So, because it's hard. So, as a person who's gone through infertility, that was important to me, to have friends, and knowing that not everybody was going to understand that, and giving a lot of grace to people who didn't. Like, we can't know everything. People's moods change too. So, just having a gracious heart towards people who don't understand, they have to have room for their own reactions too. But then, I know that was helpful for me, was having those core people who took the time to understand. And those were the people that I really talked to with my heart about where I was at. It was super helpful. I don't know about you,
Yeah, I would just say to people that are struggling with this, don't think that you're alone in this, because you're not. First of all, the Lord sees you and knows what you're going through. And also other people are going through similar things as well. It's just this weird thing in the church that we don't really talk about.
I think we're getting better about.
I mean,
but there's room for improvement. Yeah.
Yeah. We're open about it, but I think, and maybe we're open more than is comfortable for people to hear. But I know so many other people that go through it, but they feel like they're the only one, and they feel like they don't have anybody else to talk to about it, because not a lot of other people are talking about it. So I would encourage you, you're not alone. And it's so important to be in community, be with other people that you're comfortable with sharing those things with, even if it's just a person that you can walk with and be encouraged by. But we really valued each of those people that were with us and cared about us enough to.
And then what was different about those people that were so helpful is they took the time to research on their own, so that we didn't have to get that fatigue for having to answer questions. And that means a lot when someone takes the time to research what is okay to say to you when you're struggling through that, or what's an emotion you might have. I want to give you space if you don't want to. So that's super helpful to have someone who cares enough. Like, I know you're going through this, so I'm going to do the research myself, so I'm prepared when I ask you a question, so I'm not being hurtful but helpful. That's a huge thing.
Yeah. And again, just to reiterate, you're not less of a person because you're unable to have biological children. Mm-hmm. That is a lie from the enemy, and he will do whatever he can to try to discourage and distract us from who God's created us to be.
That's a good word. That's a good word. Thank you guys both so much. Do you guys have any sort of last closing comments or anything as before we wrap up?
I think we've been pretty open. I think we're happy to talk with others that are going through stuff. Yeah. And
Our story's not done yet. We still have, our daughters are growing and changing, and we're learning about different challenges with adoption. Like, it changes as they get older. Relationships are changing. The birth family and navigating that as they get older, and hard questions. So that's, if you're going through adoption, we can talk about that too, but we have to be careful in how we honor their stories too, because there's things that are hard. But it's not over. We're still growing and learning and making mistakes and doing good things as parents too, and as a family. But it's great. We're thankful that the Lord took us through this process, and he's still growing us. Yeah.
Good.
So
That's good. And if someone did want to chat with you guys about it, where can they generally find you around Morningstar? Like, what services do you tend to find yourself at?
He's here all the time. I'm here when I can.
I'm in the lobby every service, every day.
And you can always contact the church and say, hey, I know these people talked on the podcast. Can I have a discussion? You can email me
anytime, Jared, Jared @mstar.church. Okay. But I'm always around and happy to.
I'll put that in the show notes so we have it. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming on. This is such a treat. Thank you so much just for your heart for the Lord and for everything that you shared. And family, thank you so much for listening. I pray that you have an absolutely wonderful month until our next episode, and that if you are going through infertility or you know someone who is, that just Jesus really meets you in that story. We love you, family. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to the Morningstar Podcast. Join us again next time as we display God's handiwork and encourage you to live a Jesus-first life.